He looked at her like he was seeing a ghost, but it was the 4 children standing beside her, wide-eyed, curious with his face that stole his breath. "Are they yours?" he asked, the world tilting beneath him. She didn't flinch. "Ours. Welcome back to Mr. Ross' Story Trail, where every story holds more than meets the eye. If you're new here, thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let today's story stir something strong in you. May peace flood your home, may joy visit often, and may strength never be a stranger to your heart. This isn't just about betrayal. It's about quiet strength and a mother's deepest choice. In New York's world of power and precision, Calum Royce was a name spoken with a kind of awe. The youngest CEO to take his company public before 35, his world moved at the speed of profit and conquest. His suits were never wrinkled, his voice never wavered, and his calendar had no room for detours. He was sharp with numbers, sharp with strategy, and sharper still with anyone who dared to disappoint him. But beneath the tailored exterior was a man who hadn't learned softness. Life had only ever rewarded his hard edges. He hadn't known what to do with someone like Selena. She didn't arrive with noise or intention. She didn't chase the spotlight or command a room. She was stillness wrapped in subtle laughter, the kind of woman who made silence feel safe. A former literature professor, Selena Day had traded chalkboards in classrooms for community work, preferring to teach children how to fall in love with books rather than compete for academic accolades. They crossed paths at a fundraising dinner, not during some grand speech or orchestrated moment, but when Calum, distracted, scrolling through his phone, bumped into a waitress and sent red wine across Selena's pale blouse. He apologized immediately, embarrassed, irritated, and already reaching for his wallet. She laughed. "It's just a blouse," she said, dabbing at the fabric with her napkin. "You look like someone who hasn't stopped moving in years." He blinked, caught off guard. That was the first time in a long while someone had looked through him. He offered to replace the blouse. She offered to forgive him instead. They spent the rest of the evening at the edge of the crowd, away from the noise, trading thoughts on poetry and pressure, legacy and loneliness. Her voice was calm, her words unhurried. For a man used to closing deals and running empires, her presence felt like a place to rest. It wasn't supposed to go further. She lived in an entirely different rhythm than he did. But some part of Calum couldn't stop returning to her. In the days that followed, he found reasons to see her again. Donations to make, books to recommend, questions only she could answer. She, in turn, began to see pieces of him that the world ignored. Beneath his ambition, she sensed a boy who had been forced to grow up too quickly. A man who didn't trust softness because he had never been taught that it could be strong. When he proposed, it wasn't in front of cameras or boardrooms. It was on her apartment's fire escape over Chinese takeout after he'd spent the evening reading her favorite sonnets aloud in his rough, clipped voice. She said yes. Their wedding was quiet and elegant. No press, no shareholders, just family, friends, and a piano version of her favorite song as she walked down the aisle. Their early days as husband and wife were full of wonder. They'd take long walks through Central Park, where he finally learned how to slow down. They scribbled love notes to each other on breakfast napkins. They spent late nights reading under one lamp, her head on his shoulder, his hand absent-mindedly in her hair. He brought structure. She brought balance. He taught her about risk and confidence. She reminded him that vulnerability wasn't weakness. They traveled. They stayed in. They dreamed. And for a while, it felt like they had found something solid. Not perfect, but real. They spoke often of the future. Not in terms of quarterly goals or mergers, but in nursery names and lullabies. Calum wanted to be a father, wanted a son with his last name and his ambition. He spoke about building a legacy, passing something on. Selena wanted a family too, but for her, it wasn't about legacy. It was about bedtime stories and tiny hands holding hers. So they tried, and tried again. The first few months of trying to conceive were filled with hope, gentle, optimistic, and bright. Selena tracked dates. Calum cleared his schedule. They bought baby clothes far too early and made promises with eyes full of expectation. But hope, when stretched too long, starts to fray. After the first year, doctor visits replaced date nights. Conversations became clinical. The intimacy they once shared turned into appointments, charts, and calculated timing. Each month ended with silence, the kind that sat between them at the dinner table, heavy and unspoken. Selena bore the weight quietly. She never wanted pity. She smiled through blood tests, whispered prayers in waiting rooms, and kept her tears locked behind bathroom doors. Each time the result was negative, she whispered to herself, next time. Next time, it will be different. But next time never came. She tried everything, vitamins, herbal teas, acupuncture. She changed her diet, exercised, meditated. Calum, initially supportive, began to retreat. He didn't speak unkindly, but his silence was louder than any words. He buried himself in work, stayed later at the office, and stopped asking how she felt. He'd nod when she showed him another test, but the light in his eyes had dimmed. He had once held her like a promise. Now, he kissed her like an obligation. Selena knew he was hurting too, but while her pain made her softer, his hardened him. He began to view the situation as a problem to fix, not a wound to share. When the specialists offered IVF as a last hope, he agreed without emotion, treating it like a business transaction. She told herself it didn't matter, as long as they got through it together, but they weren't together anymore. They lived in the same penthouse, slept in the same bed, but miles stretched between them. Calum stopped attending appointments. When he did come, he scrolled through his phone in waiting rooms. Once, she caught him responding to emails while a nurse explained their next steps. When the first IVF attempt failed, she wept in their kitchen while the oven timer beeped. He didn't hold her. He just stood there and said, "We'll try again." The second attempt also failed. She didn't tell him until days later. The third time, she went alone. She had memorized the hallway to the fertility clinic by heart. The faded artwork, the kind receptionist, the clock that ticked far too loudly. She began to sit with other women in that space, strangers whose faces mirrored her own, hopeful, tired, brave. They exchanged soft smiles, unspoken bonds forming between them, women who carried silent wars. It was during that time that Selena began journaling again. Late at night, in a quiet corner by the window, she would write not about loss, but about what it meant to still hold on when everything seemed broken. The act of writing didn't fix anything, but it helped her remember who she was, beyond the disappointment, beyond the test results. Calum, meanwhile, had stopped pretending. He began sleeping in the guest room. When they spoke, it was only about logistics, dinner plans, charity functions, investor dinners. The man who once brought her daffodils on Tuesdays now barely noticed if she left the apartment. She didn't blame him. Not entirely. He was a man raised to believe success meant control. And this quiet agony of powerlessness, shook something in him. He couldn't solve it, couldn't command it into submission, so he turned away. Selena stayed. For 2 more years, she stayed. She smiled at parties. She attended charity events. She waved from his side in photographs. But inside, she was mourning a life that had never begun, and yet, part of her still loved him. That was the hardest part. It wasn't the anger that tore her up. It was the memory of who they used to be. It was knowing that somewhere inside the man who barely met her gaze now, there still lived the boy, who used to write her letters on napkins, the man who once read sonnets just to see her smile. But love, as she would come to learn, is not always enough. The final conversation was quiet. They sat across from each other, not as husband and wife, but as 2 people standing at the edge of something they couldn't fix. "I think," he said, his voice low, "we're holding on to something that doesn't exist anymore." She nodded. No tears, just a quiet ache in her chest. "I know." No shouting, no accusations. Just the end. 2 weeks later, she packed her things. She left the key on the counter and walked out of the penthouse for the last time. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the last IVF had worked. There was life growing inside her. What do you think? Is love still love if it cannot survive pressure? Can 2 people grow apart without losing their original truth? Tell me in the comments, do you believe love alone is ever enough to hold a relationship together? Or does it take more? 3 years had passed. 3 years since the goodbye that felt more like a whisper than a wound. Since Selena had left behind the skyline, the dinners, the flashbulbs, and the man who once promised her the world. In those 3 years, Calum Royce had only grown more powerful. He had doubled his company's valuation, graced the covers of industry magazines, and had become a regular guest on high-level business panels. To the world, he was the model of triumph, composed, brilliant, untouchable. So when he sat down for Power Profiles, a glossy segment known for its friendly, ego-polishing interviews, no one expected it to stir controversy. It was a studio interview. Wide couches, soft lighting, scripted laughter. Nothing ever shook here, until the host asked a personal question. Do you regret anything in your personal life? Anything you'd do differently if you had the chance? Calum didn't hesitate. He looked directly into the camera, his voice calm, his expression void of warmth. Yes, he said. I regret wasting years with someone who gave me nothing, no family, no children. That part of my life was barren, literally. The host let out an awkward chuckle, unsure whether it was a joke. The audience laughed. Calum leaned back, unbothered, adjusting his cufflinks. We all make mistakes, he added casually. Some just cost more than others. The segment aired that evening. Within hours, it had been clipped, captioned, and circulated across every social media platform imaginable. Cold as ice. CEO's savage moment. He said what he said. Comments poured in. Some praising his candor, others calling it cruel. Hashtags trended. Memes followed. And somewhere far away from the frenzy, in a modest sunlit kitchen in Maine, Selena Day received a message from an old friend. Have you seen this? She hadn't. She wasn't expecting to. But she clicked the link anyway, one hand resting lightly on the wooden table as the video loaded. She watched in silence. Her face didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't fill. No gasps. No broken sobs. Just a quiet inhale, the kind you take when you're choosing strength over collapse. She closed the laptop gently and looked out the window. In the garden, her 4 children were playing. Nova was drawing suns in the dirt. Elian and Ivor were chasing butterflies, arms stretched like wings. Suri sat cross-legged in the grass, humming to herself. They were alive, bright, messy, loud, real. She let her gaze settle on them, and in that still moment, something in her spirit settled too. He could call her barren. The world could laugh, but they didn't know. They didn't know that her heart beat outside her body in 4 small forms, that in the quiet years after the divorce, while the world turned its back, life had turned toward her. She had not only become a mother, she had become everything she never thought she could be, and she had done it without him. Long before Calum's words circled the internet like wildfire, Selena had made her choice. She hadn't made it in anger, not out of spite, but in stillness, in the sterile quiet of an ultrasound room, as 4 tiny pulses blinked across a screen. Her final IVF procedure, done alone after the divorce, had worked. The odds were slim. The doctors had warned her of the risks. But when she saw those flickering heartbeats, something inside her whispered, "This is mine." Not a possession, a promise. She knew what Calum would have done with the news. A press release, a claim, a branding opportunity for the Royce dynasty. She couldn't let that happen. They deserved to be loved as children, not as heirs. They deserved lullabies, not boardroom legacies. She didn't want them measured by what they could become, only held for who they already were. So she said nothing. She moved quietly, left the city behind, found a small town along the Maine coastline where the sky felt wider and the noise dimmed. She rented a modest house with chipped paint and a squeaky porch swing. It didn't matter. She had what mattered growing inside her. The pregnancy was brutal. Her body ached in ways she didn't know it could. The loneliness was crushing, especially at night when the wind howled and the weight of carrying 4 lives felt like it might bury her. But she endured. She sang to them when no one could hear. She journaled every kick, every flutter, every dream. Her strength surprised even herself. When they were born, Nova first, then Elian, Ivor, and Suri, the silence of the hospital room was broken by the cries of a chorus she had longed for. She held them to her chest, one by one, counted fingers, kissed foreheads, whispered their names like prayers. There were no photographers, no celebratory announcements, no gifts from billion-dollar boardrooms, just one woman, 4 babies, and the start of a life she never imagined. The early years were chaos. 4 cribs, 4 feeding schedules, mountains of laundry, bottles that never stayed full, nights with no sleep and days that blurred into each other. Her body was tired, her back ached, her hands cracked from washing, but her heart had never been so full. She took joy in the little things. Suri's first laugh, a bubbling melody that made her cry. Elian's habit of crawling towards sunlight, Ivor's curious silence, Nova's fierce protectiveness over them all. They called her Mama before they ever said milk. In those years, there were no awards, no acclaim, but there was love. Pure, exhausting, beautiful. Selena worked from home, editing manuscripts, writing educational material for libraries. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on. She lived frugally. She grew herbs in the windowsill. The neighbors knew her name, brought casseroles during flu season, helped shovel snow in winter. Her life was small, but full. So when she watched that video clip, Calum's cold dismissal of her worth, she did not fall apart. He saw her as the woman who gave him nothing, but she had given everything. Her body, her heart, her silence. She had protected 4 sacred lives and raised them with nothing but grit and love. What he threw away, she had grown into something whole. Later that week, she sat in the backyard as the kids played. The grass was patchy. Their shoes were muddy, but they were happy. She watched Nova teach the others how to make a paper crown. She used leaves and twigs, her tongue poking out in concentration. Elian clapped when it didn't fall apart. Ivor asked for his to be green. Suri just twirled with hers on, laughing. Selena closed her eyes for a moment, felt the sun on her skin, listened to their joy. This was what Calum would never understand. This peace, this wild, simple, earned joy. He could trend online. She had what mattered. Selena didn't call him. She didn't post a rebuttal or grant interviews. She didn't correct the narrative or try to salvage her name. She simply kept living, let the world think what it would, because deep down, she knew the truth. Her children knew the truth, and one day, if life willed it, he would too. Selena didn't move with fanfare or farewell. She packed slowly, folding clothes between pauses, pressing books to her chest as if deciding which pieces of her old life were worth bringing. By the time the last bag was zipped, the apartment had become quiet again. Not like before, when it echoed with absence, but quiet with choice. She left New York behind without announcing it. The town she chose sat just outside the map of attention. A place where doors still had bells, shopkeepers remembered your name, and time didn't punish you for moving slowly. It was close to the water. The air tasted of salt and pine, and no one asked questions when a single woman with 4 newborns moved into a modest rental with peeling shutters and a porch that creaked. She didn't care. The walls were thin, but they held love. The days were long. Feeding 1 baby was exhausting. Feeding 4 meant round-the-clock shifts that blurred into each other. She learned to sleep in intervals, to eat while standing, to carry 2 crying infants, and soothe a 3rd with her voice alone. Her body ached in places she didn't know could ache. Her arms were always full. Her eyes carried permanent shadows. But her heart was healing. Each child taught her something different. Nova, the firstborn, was bold, her cries the loudest, her gaze unflinching. She stared at Selena like she was trying to understand the world before trusting it. Selena often found herself whispering promises into her curls. "You're safe. I'm not going anywhere." Elian was all heart, sensitive to sound, light, emotion. When one of his siblings cried, he cried too. He was always reaching, for her hand, her face, her voice. He reminded her that softness was a strength, not a burden. Ivor didn't rush. While the others kicked and flailed, he watched. Quiet, observant, a thinker. He rarely cried, but when he did, it was deep and full of meaning. Selena respected his silence. She understood it. And then there was Suri, the light. She smiled early, giggled first, brought joy into every room. Even when Selena hadn't slept for 2 nights, Suri's laughter made it feel like the sun had returned. They weren't just her children. They were her mirror, her second chance, her healing in the form of 4 little souls. The town didn't gossip. They welcomed her the way nature does, without fuss, without intrusion. A neighbor brought warm bread one evening and left it on the porch. Another handed her a gently used stroller at the farmer's market without a word. The librarian started slipping picture books into her bag with sticky notes that said, "Thought they'd love this one." Selena began to breathe again. Not the shallow breaths of survival, but full ones. The kind that fill your chest and let you believe that life might still surprise you with goodness. She made a rhythm. Morning walks with all 4 in the quad stroller. Elian always tried to unbuckle himself. Nova pointed at every passing bird. Ivor sucked his thumb, and Suri sang nonsense songs. Afternoons were for naps, folding laundry with one baby on her hip and another on her back. Evenings were stories, soft ones, silly ones, sometimes ones she made up on the spot. She learned how to fix things, loose crib screws, leaking faucets, squeaky doors. She learned how to stretch one paycheck across 4 growing appetites. She learned how to live without needing applause. Birthdays were small but sacred. Their first birthday was spent in the backyard with balloons from the dollar store, a homemade cake that leaned slightly to the left, and a playlist of lullabies. She took photos, dozens of them, but never posted them. These weren't moments for the world. They were hers. Nova smeared frosting on Ivor's face. Suri clapped along to her own singing. Elian fell asleep mid-party with his face in a slice of cake. Selena just watched, and smiled, and let herself feel proud. She had feared she might never be enough, but here she was, building a family from what everyone else had called failure. Have you ever had to rebuild after everything fell apart? Tell me in the comments, what did you learn about yourself in the quiet, private moments of starting over? Was it harder than you expected? Or somehow more beautiful? Your story matters, and you never know who needs to hear it. Selena never expected healing to look like spilled cereal, sticky hands, and crayon murals on her living room walls. But it did. Each day brought another layer of life. Not glamorous, not polished, but deeply alive. The kind of life that wasn't measured in headlines or profit margins, but in bedtime routines and whispered goodnights. The children grew fast. Nova learned to read first, which surprised no one. She'd always had questions, always challenged her mother with wide-eyed curiosity and stubborn certainty. Selena would find her reading out loud to her siblings, circling words with her finger and announcing, "This says adventure," even if it didn't. Cleon had a heart too big for his own good. He cried when animals got hurt in cartoons. Once, when Selena accidentally stepped on a toy, he apologized on its behalf. "It didn't mean to be there," he said with a quivering lip. She hugged him for a long time. Ivor hardly spoke, but when he did, his words were golden. One afternoon, while lying on the floor staring at the ceiling, he said, "Tea like when the light comes through the trees. It feels like music without sound." Selena had to walk into the kitchen to cry quietly. Suri danced everywhere, even when there was no music. She had no volume control and no shame. She wore capes made from pillowcases and insisted that bananas were magical. Life made sense to her in its own way, and Selena had learned not to question it. Their drawings covered the fridge. Selena had a folder, thick, loved, filled with stick figures, rainbows, and crooked hearts. One day, Suri had drawn their house, one big person, 4 small ones, and a sky full of stars. "Where's Daddy?" Ivor had asked, innocently. Selena paused. She knelt beside them. "Some families have a mommy and a daddy. Some have just one. Some have 2 of each. Ours has me. And that's more than enough, don't you think?" They nodded, not because they understood it all, but because they trusted her. That was enough for now. At night, once the last toy had been put away, Selena would sit by the window with a cup of tea, her legs folded under her, her body aching in quiet, grateful ways. She didn't wish for the past anymore. She didn't wish to be seen. She only wished to protect this strange, beautiful world she had built from ashes. There were moments, of course, when doubt tried to return. When she saw other parents, couples, hand in hand at school pick up. When someone in the market casually asked, "Where's their father?" with a tone too heavy to ignore. But it never stayed long, because she had learned that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, gentle, patient. Sometimes power is a woman in a worn sweater holding her sleeping child, humming a tune no one else hears, and knowing she's exactly where she's meant to be. Once, she found herself staring at an old photo from years ago, one of the few she hadn't packed away. It was taken during a rooftop dinner Caleb had planned early in their marriage. Her face was tilted toward him, laughing, eyes bright. His arm was around her, but his gaze wasn't on her. It was past her, towards something distant. She put the photo down. That woman doesn't exist anymore, she thought. And she was thankful for it. She no longer needed revenge. She no longer needed to be proven right. She had 4 living reminders that she hadn't failed. She had chosen love, real love, the kind that wakes you up at 3 a.m., stains your clothes, empties your bank account, and still makes you sing lullabies with cracked lips. Selena didn't live to prove anything. She lived to protect something. And every night, when she tucked the kids into bed, one by one, forehead kisses and whispered blessings, she reminded herself. She hadn't lost her life. She had found it. The event was tasteful, filled with carefully curated sculptures, canvas work by local children, and string lights that gave the evening a glow of quiet sophistication. The space buzzed with polite laughter, the clinking of glasses, and occasional rounds of applause. Calum Royce didn't particularly care for these events, but he knew their value. His firm had sponsored the evening, something about investing in the next generation of creativity. His publicist insisted he attend, and so he did, tailored and unreadable, his presence alone enough to satisfy the cameras. He shook hands, posed when asked, gave a few flat compliments to parents showing off their children's paintings. No one noticed that he wasn't truly looking, until he stopped mid-step, suddenly still. Across the gallery floor, surrounded by soft conversation and framed finger paintings, stood a woman he hadn't seen in 5 years. She was laughing gently, crouched beside a small easel where a child's painting hung. Her dress was simple. Her hair was longer, but it was her. Selina. Calum's breath caught in his throat. Not because she was stunning, though she was, but because she looked different, solid, present, like someone who had nothing to prove to anyone. And then he saw them. 4 children, not far from her, each admiring the artwork on the wall with a kind of curiosity only young minds carried. They stood close to her, close to each other. He blinked. The smallest girl tugged on Selina's hand. "Is mine crooked?" she asked. Selina smiled and adjusted the painting just slightly. "Now it's perfect," she whispered. It wasn't the scene that stopped Calum's world. It was the fact that all 4 of them looked like him. The same eyes, the same sharp jawline, the same restless energy just beneath the surface. He took a slow step forward, not even realizing his glass was still in his hand. The sounds of the fundraiser faded. Conversations became a hum in the background. Selina straightened up and met his gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply tilted her head and waited. There was no tension in her shoulders, no fear, just quiet awareness. He moved toward her like a man walking through a memory. The last time he saw her, she was leaving with a single suitcase and silence. And now, she stood before him, more radiant than he remembered, with 4 shadows at her feet who looked like they belonged to him. He stopped just short of her, his voice almost a whisper. "Selina?" She looked at him calmly. "Hello, Calum." He glanced at the children again. They had gone quiet now, clustered together, sensing something in the air. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. How are you here?" he finally managed. "I'm their mother," she said gently, as if explaining something obvious. "I mean," he swallowed hard. "You look whole," she offered. "I am." He looked again. At her, at the children, back to her. They're yours?" he asked, but the question betrayed itself. He already knew. Selina followed his gaze to her children, then looked back at him. "They're ours." The word didn't echo, but it landed like a stone in his chest. "Ours?" His voice cracked around it. Selina didn't blink. "Yes." Calum looked at each child again, more closely now. He saw it, the unmistakable pieces of himself reflected back. Nova's gaze, Elian's chin, Ivor's stance, Suri's spark. They weren't imitations. They were his legacy in the purest form. And yet, he hadn't known they existed. He stepped back, unsteady for the first time in a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" Selina exhaled softly, like she had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times and now it was simply unfolding. "Because you didn't want children unless they arrived on your terms." "That's not fair," he muttered, but even he didn't believe it. "You said it yourself," she replied, her tone steady. "On camera, in front of the world, that I gave you nothing." He flinched. "I gave everything," she continued. "I gave my body, my hope, my silence. And when you had the chance to honor what we went through, you used it as a punchline." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The children stood behind her now, quiet but watching. Nova clung to her side. Elian peeked from behind her dress. Ivor squinted at Calum like he was solving a puzzle. Suri tilted her head, curious but unsure. "They don't know you," Selina added gently. "And I didn't want them growing up thinking love was cold. That presence was something to earn." He opened his mouth, closed it again. There were no words, not ones that would reach her. Not yet. I didn't do this to punish you, she said. I did this to protect them. Silence hung between them. Not the awkward kind, the kind that came when truth entered the room and refused to be ignored. Someone announced the start of a live auction at the far end of the gallery. Polite laughter stirred the air again. A jazz trio picked up their instruments. But where they stood, everything slowed. The lights didn't dim, but the world did. Calum wasn't a CEO here. He wasn't the man with the car, the reputation, the empire. He was just a man. Staring at 4 children he didn't know how to reach. Selina turned to them, her tone shifting. Kids, she said, kneeling down. This is someone I used to know. Someone important. They didn't run. They didn't smile. They just stared. Suri stepped forward first. Are you a friend? Calum blinked. I don't know. Selina's lips parted for a moment, but she let the question hang. Suri looked up at him. You look like Elian. I guess I do, Calum said quietly. It was the only thing he could manage. Selina rose again, gently placing a hand on Suri's shoulder. I'm not hiding anymore, she said, her voice softer now. But don't mistake that for an invitation. Calum met her eyes. For the first time, really met them. She wasn't angry. She wasn't bitter. She was beyond both. What he saw was something far more powerful than either. Peace. A peace he hadn't earned. A peace that didn't include him. Not yet. He nodded, just once. Not in agreement, in recognition. Then, wordlessly, Selina turned. She guided her children toward the art table, where other kids were gluing feathers to paper. They joined in like nothing had happened. Because for them, nothing had. This was their world. He was the stranger. Calum stood alone, the chatter of the room slowly rushing back in like a tide he couldn't stop. The lights were still soft. The cameras were still rolling somewhere, but none of it mattered. He had been looking for legacy in boardrooms and bloodlines, but it had been here all along, at eye level with a child who didn't know his name. The night after the fundraiser, Calum couldn't sleep. He replayed every moment, the way Selina said ours without blinking, the look in the children's eyes, the echo of her voice as she calmly said, "They don't know you." He paced his apartment in silence, lights off, the city outside flickering like it always did. But for the first time, he didn't feel part of it. He was watching it, removed from it, unmoored. By morning, he had already sent a message to his legal team. If they were his children, and there was no doubt now, he had rights, custody, visitation, acknowledgement, something. There had to be a way to claim them. To correct this, the lawyer assigned to the matter was clinical and efficient. Calum spoke with his usual clipped tone, laying out what he wanted. Establish paternity, assert involvement, draft emergency motions, quietly, of course. It took 48 hours for Selina to respond, not directly, but through an attorney of her own. The answer was clear, no. Not only that, it was final. They met in a small room on neutral ground, at the request of the mediator. Just once, Selina walked in holding a folder. Calm, graceful, wearing no makeup, no jewelry, nothing performative, just presence. Calum, in contrast, looked like a man dressed for a negotiation. It didn't last long. I'm not here to argue, Selina said, before the mediator even began. I'm here to draw a line. You kept my children from me. Calum snapped. They're not property, she replied. You don't get to claim them after 5 years of silence. I didn't know. You didn't ask. Her voice never rose. Not once. Not when I left. Not when I disappeared. You never looked back. Calum's mouth tightened. He leaned forward. They're mine, Selina. They're people, she said evenly. Not investments, not names on a portfolio. You don't get to show up now and start making demands. He clenched his jaw. So what do you want? For me to disappear again? No, she said softly. I want you to understand that you don't get to build a bond through a courtroom. You don't earn trust with documents. They're mine too, he repeated, quieter now. Selina looked directly at him. If you want to be a father, you don't start with lawyers. You start by showing up and staying. The room fell still. There it was, the truth, wrapped in something heavier than anger, something closer to sorrow. Calum stood slowly. He said nothing else, not because he agreed, but because he had no reply. In the weeks that followed, he tried to control the situation the only way he knew. How? By working harder, throwing more resources at it and pushing from a distance. But nothing worked. No judge would force a custody hearing on a woman raising healthy, happy children with no record of wrongdoing, especially not when the father had been absent by choice. The case had no legs. His lawyers stepped back, and Calum, for the first time in his life, was told no in a language he couldn't rewrite. The children were out of reach. And so, he watched. At first it was curiosity. He asked a staff member to check Selena's address. He had it within hours, a modest street in a town with no skyscrapers. He sent a driver, not to engage, just to observe. The first report came back with photos. Nova, holding a library book taller than her arms. Elion, chasing a balloon that had gotten stuck in a tree. Ivor, sitting quietly on a bench near his school. Suri, licking an ice cream cone with most of it on her shirt. And Selena, walking with them, backpack slung over one shoulder, sunglasses in her hair. No assistants, no cameras, just her. The next week, he went himself. He stayed in a nearby hotel, dressed down, left his driver behind. No one recognized him. The town didn't care who he was. He sat in the back row of a community theater during their school's seasonal recital. The lights dimmed. A group of children shuffled on stage, nervous and excited. Music started, and then, there they were. 4 small figures, 1 play, 4 roles. Nova sang the opening line, eyes steady on the crowd. Elian forgot a word, laughed, and tried again. Ivor didn't speak at all, but held his prop with quiet confidence. Suri waved at the audience twice, completely off cue. They were perfect. Calum sat there, frozen. This was the legacy he had claimed to want, the future he had spoken about in press interviews, the life he'd once dismissed as barren. But it had bloomed. Without him, he wasn't angry anymore. He was ashamed. He kept coming back. At first, he told himself it was for clarity, to understand what he'd missed. But in truth, it was something deeper, something he hadn't felt since he was a child himself, longing. He parked across from the school some afternoons, hidden behind tinted windows. Other days he sat on the public bench near the playground, pretending to check his phone while the children raced across the field. He didn't bring cameras. He didn't wear suits. He was just there. At first, it was hard to watch. The way Selena knew exactly how to calm Elian when his feelings got too big. The way she carried snacks for all 4, even though only one had asked. The way she crouched to eye level, never talking at them, always with them. She wasn't perfect. She was exhausted. There were moments she clearly wanted to scream. But she never made her struggle their burden. And they adored her for it. They clung to her, confided in her, trusted her like their lives depended on it. He had never known what that kind of love looked like from the outside. Now, he couldn't look away. Eventually, the kids noticed him. First it was Ivor, staring too long from the sandbox. Then Nova, narrowing her eyes as if trying to place him. Suri waved once, unprompted. Elian didn't notice at all. He was too busy tying and retying his shoelaces. But none of them ran. None of them cried. Selena saw him too. Once, she didn't wave, didn't scold, didn't acknowledge him at all, but she didn't tell him to leave either. That was something. One Saturday, he attended a public event at the town library. It was a Read With Me program. Parents and volunteers could sign up to read to children in small breakout circles. He didn't sign up. He just watched. Selena was seated cross-legged on a rainbow-colored rug, reading Where the Wild Things Are in different voices. The kids were captivated. Suri roared with laughter. Nova rolled her eyes when she mispronounced something. Elian rested his head on her knee. Ivor sat just beside, fiddling with a shoelace. Calum stood in the back, hands in his pockets, eyes burning. This was what he never made room for. He had once called her life barren. Now he saw it for what it was, rich in all the ways that mattered. That night, he couldn't sleep. Not from guilt, that had already come and gone. It was something else. He wanted in. But not as a name on paper, not as a paycheck, or a headline, or a parent by default. He wanted to be earned. So, he started small. He sent a book donation to the library, under the name Day Family Reading Fund. He paid for the cracked slide in the park to be repaired, anonymously. He volunteered at the school fall festival, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, scooping popcorn, unnoticed except by Suri, who pointed and said, "You're the man from the bench." He smiled. "I guess I am." She didn't press. She just accepted it. Children often do. Selena didn't say anything for weeks. But one day, she walked past him after school drop-off and simply said, "They're watching." He nodded. "I know. Don't disappear," she added, not turning around. "I won't," he replied, and this time, he meant it. The shift was slow. One week, Ivor waved at him from across the street. The next, Elian handed him a drawing, a blob of color with stick arms labeled "you." Nova, skeptical and observant, asked, "Why are you always around now?" "I'm learning," he said honestly. Suri invited him to her puppet show but warned, "You have to clap every time." He clapped every time. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for a title. He just kept showing up. He learned their rhythms, their stories, their personalities. He sat on cold bleachers during soccer games. He clapped off-beat during school performances. He burned pancakes on his first attempt and kept trying until Suri declared them not terrible. Selena watched. She didn't open the door wide, but she didn't close it either. Forgiveness, she knew, wasn't something you gave away like candy. It was something that happened when someone proved they'd changed, not with words, but with time. "Tell me honestly, do you believe people deserve second chances? Not when they ask for it, but when they start showing up differently? Have you ever forgiven someone who once hurt you deeply? Or been on the other side, and had to prove you were no longer who you used to be? Share your story below. Someone may need to hear it. The first time Caleb helped with a morning routine, it was a disaster. He arrived early, coffee in hand, dressed casually but clearly trying too hard. The kids were in various stages of wakefulness, Nova brushing her teeth angrily, Suri wearing 2 different socks, Ivor still under the blanket, and Elian quietly staring out the window. Selena didn't say much. She handed him a basket of folded laundry and motioned to the hallway. "You can help them get dressed. They're picky." "Picky how?" "You'll find out." 20 minutes later, Suri was crying because her tights had a bump. Elian refused to wear any shirt that wasn't green, Nova had declared. She'd rather stay home than look like a clown, and Ivor had managed to put both legs into one pant leg and simply refused to move. Caleb stood in the middle of the room, holding a polka dot sock like it might bite him. Selena passed by the doorway, hiding a smile. "Still want to do breakfast duty?" He didn't answer. But the next morning, he showed up again. He learned quickly that fatherhood wasn't about big decisions. It was about remembering which kid liked apples with cinnamon, which one hated the sound of the blender, and who needed a moment of quiet before speaking. He stopped dressing for perfection and started dressing for spills. He downloaded parenting books, but quickly learned that real lessons came from trial and error. He burned the pancakes. Multiple times. Suri declared them tastier when ugly. That became their thing. Ugly pancakes, served on Saturdays, stacked unevenly and drowned in syrup. He kept a notepad tucked in his jacket where he jotted things down. Ivor likes blue plates. Elian shuts down when overstimulated. Don't rush him. Nova needs to be asked, not told. Suri needs hugs often. They didn't call him anything at first. Just him or the guy who helps. He didn't press it. He didn't ask for titles or pictures or hugs. He just stayed. He became part of their routines, like an extra chair at the table or a light left on in the hallway. Present. Steady. He walked them to school when he could. He learned the teachers' names. He clapped too loudly at Elian's shy attempt during music day. He helped Nova fix her cardboard solar system when it fell apart. He made a fool of himself during the dance circle at family day, and didn't care. He showed up in the background of drawings they brought home, first as a blob, then as a tall stick figure with a big nose and squiggly hair. Eventually, one of those drawings came home labeled, "Me and Dad." It was Elian's. Caleb didn't cry in front of them. He waited until he was alone. It was the first time someone had called him that without conditions, not because he'd earned it fully, but because he'd finally become someone who stayed long enough to try. Selena noticed the difference. She never said it aloud, but she saw it in the way he kneeled instead of stood over them, in the way he asked questions instead of giving orders, in the way he made mistakes and owned them. She had once known a man who needed control like he needed air. Now she saw someone learning how to breathe without it. She still watched, still waited. Forgiveness was never quick, but trust had begun to open its eyes. It started with a missing toothbrush. which turned into a spilled cup, which led to a wet pair of pajamas, which somehow involved glitter, no one knew how, and ended with 4 half-dressed children chasing a fly around the living room. Selina stood in the hallway, watching the madness unfold. She didn't interfere. This was his night. Calum, once a master of organized chaos, now had bananas smeared on his shoulder and glitter in his eyebrow. He held Suri's toothbrush in one hand and a stuffed bunny in the other. "I think bedtime is going well," he said, deadpan. Selina smirked and walked away without a word. He got them settled. Eventually, Suri curled up beside her pillow fort and fell asleep mid-sentence. Elian needed a lullaby he'd have. Remembered from his own childhood, Ivor only settled when the room was completely dark, and Calum sat on the floor beside the bed for 5 full minutes without speaking. That left Nova. She lay in bed, facing the wall. Her lamp was on, and her arms were crossed. "You forgot my book," she said. "I did," Calum admitted, stepping inside. "Want me to get it?" She didn't answer. He took that as a yes. When he returned, she was still turned away. He sat beside her bed and began reading anyway, his voice quiet, unsure, stopping over words she usually corrected. She didn't speak. He kept going. Halfway through the second page, she turned slowly and looked at him. "Why Dow?" He stopped. "Why are you here now?" she asked, louder this time. "Why didn't you come before?" He lowered the book. "Because I didn't know how to be here, back then." She stared at him. "I thought being a father meant having all the answers," he said honestly. "But I didn't even know the right questions." Nova sat up, knees hugged to her chest. "And now?" she whispered. "Now I'm learning," he replied. She looked at him for a long time, then reached under her pillow and pulled out a tiny drawing, a stick figure standing in the corner of a house. "This was you," she said. Calum took it gently. Nova reached for a crayon on her nightstand, and without a word, drew a small line connecting the figure to the rest of the family. He didn't speak. He just nodded. Down the hall, Selina peeked in. 4 sleeping children. Calum still sitting on the floor, hand resting gently on the edge of Nova's bed. She hadn't expected to feel anything that night. But something small and warm moved inside her chest. Not love, not yet, but something like the memory of it. The days that followed blurred into softness. He picked him up from school in the rain and forgot the umbrellas. They didn't care. They danced in it. He let them help cook dinner, which ended with burnt noodles and laughter that shook the walls. He taught Ivor how to tie his shoes, slowly, messily, until Ivor beamed with pride and shouted, "I did it!" He sat with Suri for an hour while she cried because her favorite sock had a hole. He stitched it himself with trembling hands and uneven thread. He taught Elian how to ride a bike. He learned Nova's favorite way to be hugged, not all at once, just gently, side by side, no pressure. One night, as he buckled the kids into bed, Suri wrapped her arms around his leg. "Good night, Daddy." He froze. The others looked up. Elian echoed it next. Then Ivor, even Nova, slow, cautious, whispered it as she rolled onto her side. Selina stood at the doorway, arms folded, eyes full. Calum blinked hard. "Good night," he said, his voice low. "I love you." When the house went still, Selina handed him a cup of tea. He took it with both hands, carefully, like it might break. They sat in silence. He looked at her, his voice quiet. "I didn't know this was possible." She looked back. "It is. When you stay." The sky had darkened hours before the rain arrived. It wasn't a downpour, just a quiet, steady fall. Not loud enough to wake the children, just enough to hush the street, to make every light inside a window feel warmer by comparison. Selina stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a plate, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. The house was finally quiet. Pajamas had been chosen, toothbrushes used, books read. 4 small hearts were sleeping upstairs. The knock came once, then again, soft, almost hesitant. She dried her hands, glanced at the clock, then walked slowly to the door. When she opened it, there he was, no coat, no umbrella, just a hoodie that was already soaked through. Water clung to his lashes. His shoulders sagged under something heavier than weather. "I didn't plan to come," he said quietly. "But you did," she replied. He nodded. They stood like that for a moment, 2 people suspended in the space between history and healing. Selina stepped aside. He didn't sit. He stood near the edge of the room, dripping silently on the mat by the door. I've rehearsed this, he began, voice rough, but now that I'm here, I don't know how to say it. Try, she said. He looked at her, really looked, and shook his head slowly. You were right. I didn't look back. I didn't check. I didn't want to see anything that reminded me I'd failed. She stayed silent. I blamed you, he went on, not because you were at fault, but because I couldn't accept that something I wanted didn't go my way. So I made it your fault. He looked down. I said things that no one should ever say, not to someone they once loved, not even to someone they didn't. Selena's breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. He stepped forward, slow, careful. You weren't empty, he said. You were the only one who was full. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything he hadn't said before. Every moment she'd cried alone. Every word he'd thrown like a blade. Every apology that had come too late. Selena leaned against the counter. Her fingers traced a circle on the rim of a nearby mug. I used to wish you'd come back and say these things, she said softly. And then I stopped wishing. Not out of anger, just exhaustion. He nodded, wet hair clinging to his forehead. I don't expect anything from this, he said. Not a clean slate, not a place in your life. I just wanted to say it, out loud, to you. She walked to the coat rack and pulled down a blanket, handed it to him without a word. He wrapped it around his shoulders. Do they know? He asked. No, she said. They know you as you are now. That's enough for them. I won't change that. He nodded again. More silence, but not cold. Selena poured him a cup of tea, the same way she always had, with 2 spoons of honey, no questions asked. She placed it in front of him without looking for thanks. He nodded, wrapping his hands around the warmth, though he hadn't stopped shivering. You're not the man I knew, she said quietly. He flinched, but she held up her hand. I don't mean that to hurt you. I mean, you're not him anymore. Back then you were unreachable, obsessed with control. You didn't see me. She turned toward him fully, her eyes steady. You see now? He looked away. Too late. I don't know, she said. But I'm not angry anymore, just tired of being the one who had to carry it all. He swallowed hard. I know, he whispered. She didn't rush this conversation. She let it breathe, let it sit between them like something neither of them had to fix. You hurt me, she said simply. I know. You said things I still hear sometimes. When I'm most vulnerable. I'm sorry. I believe you. She crossed her arms loosely. But I'm not saying that because everything is okay now. I'm saying it because I can tell you actually mean it. He looked up. And that matters? It matters more than you think, she said. They stood in the kitchen as the rain softened outside, a lull falling over the world as if it too had run out of noise. The silence between them now was different, no longer filled with things left unsaid, but things slowly beginning to settle. He stepped closer to the edge of the rug, as far as he dared. Do you think, he asked carefully, that I could keep coming around? For them? Selena didn't answer right away. She studied him, not with suspicion, but with the deliberate gaze of someone who had learned to protect what she built. Finally, she nodded. Yes, but not as a guest, not as a visitor who disappears. You come as someone who's willing to stay through the hard days too. I can do that, he said. Don't say it unless you mean it. I mean it. She turned her back to him and rinsed the cup she'd left in the sink earlier. He didn't take it as dismissal. He took it as permission to begin again. As he stepped toward the door, blanket still draped over his shoulders, Selena called softly, Calum? He turned. Thank you. For coming wet. He blinked. It means you didn't stop to think your way through this, she added. You just felt it. And you followed that feeling here. He nodded once. I almost didn't. But you did, she said. And that's how things begin. He stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the sound of the softened rain fill the space between them. He stepped outside without speaking again. She didn't close the door immediately. He didn't announce the move. He just showed up one morning with boxes, a rental truck, and a hesitant smile. There was no press release, no assistant trailing behind, no farewell articles in the business section. Calum Royce, the man who had once ruled from glass towers, now stood barefoot, on a porch that needed repainting, holding a carton labeled winter socks. Selena met him at the top of the steps. No going back? She asked. No, he said. Only forward. She opened the door, and that was enough. The first few weeks were messy, not dramatic, just real. He learned how to pack lunchboxes without forgetting utensils. He discovered that Eliane had a deep fear of thunder and always needed someone close when it rumbled. He learned how to style Suri's hair, poorly at first, hilariously at second, confidently by week 4. Nova tested him the hardest. She watched him with eyes older than her age. Not cruel, just cautious, like she was measuring the weight of every promise before believing it. But slowly, she let him in. One night, he sat beside her as she worked on a school project. She handed him the glue stick without a word. Later, she asked if he wanted to read her presentation. It was about second chances. He and Selena found a rhythm. They didn't try to recapture what was lost. They didn't chase romance or replay the past. They made coffee together. They folded laundry in silence. They shared groceries and bills and morning drop-offs. But most importantly, they shared presence. She noticed how he had changed. The urgency in him was gone, replaced by patience, by humor, by a softness that didn't come from weakness, but from learning what matters most. She let herself laugh again, not because of who he was, but because of who she had become in spite of it. They didn't fall back in love overnight. They just started noticing each other in ways that felt real. The children adjusted, not with speeches, but with questions. Will you be at my recital? Can you make the pancakes this time? Do you know where my drawing went? Can we build the fort together? Every question was a test, and every answer Caleb gave, especially when it was yes, built something unseen between them. He no longer looked out over cities and saw opportunity. Now he looked across the dinner table and saw everything he once overlooked. It was Suri who found the envelopes first. 4 of them, lined up neatly on the breakfast table, 1 for each of the kids. Handwritten names in ink that looked careful, a little shaky, like someone had taken their time. Inside each was a note, short and simple. We'd like you to be there when we promise each other something important. Just us, just family. Below the note was a small hand-drawn heart, clearly from Selena's pen. And next to it, the initials of the man who now burned the pancakes with pride. Eliane tilted his head. Is this like a birthday? No, Nova whispered, rereading hers. It's a wedding. A what? Ivor blinked. Suri clapped her hands. Are we getting cake? The ceremony was held on a Sunday morning. No tuxedos, no fancy dresses, just clothes that fit well and felt like home. It took place in the backyard, where the grass had grown wild in places and the trees bowed just enough to form a quiet arch. The kids had helped hang paper lanterns the night before. Nova even made a flower crown for her mom out of twigs and dandelions. There was no music, only wind and breathing and the soft rhythm of hearts standing close. Caleb waited beneath the tree he'd helped them decorate, adjusting his collar for the 3rd time. His hands were trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from awe. Selena stepped out slowly, barefoot in the grass. No veil, no bouquet, just presence. He smiled. She returned it. The children stood to the side, fidgeting, curious, wide-eyed. Suri kept holding Nova's hand. Eliane bounced on his heels. Ivor held a ring in his palm like it was something magical. There was no officiant, no stage, just a circle, a family. Selena spoke first. Her voice was steady. I'm not promising perfection, she said. I'm promising honesty, growth, patience, and that I'll never pretend the past didn't happen. But I will never stop believing in who you're becoming. Caleb nodded, his eyes wet. He took a breath. I failed the first time because I didn't know how to show up, he said. But I'm standing here now because I've learned that love isn't built in promises. It's built in pancakes and storybooks and silent rooms where someone chooses to stay. He turned to the children. I'm not replacing anyone. I'm just adding to what already exists. If you'll let me. Nova didn't answer, but she smiled. That was more than enough. They exchanged simple rings. Nothing expensive. Just symbols. 1 gold. 1 silver, and with no music, no fanfare, no spotlight, they whispered the final words. Not for legacy, not for legacy, for love, for love. Afterward, they sat on the grass and shared lemon cake from a paper plate. The children took turns smearing frosting on each other. Ivor got it in his ear. Suri made everyone laugh by declaring herself the minister of dancing and spinning in circles. There were no headlines, no applause, just belonging. That evening, Caleb tucked them all in. Each one asked for a different bedtime story. He read them all, and when the last light turned off, he stood at the doorway, watching the quiet rise and fall of their breathing. Selena stood behind him, arms folded lightly. He turned. She looked up at him. This time, he didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. She was already walking beside him. In a world chasing titles, numbers, and recognition, what does real wealth mean to you? Is it family? Peace of mind? A quiet kitchen filled with laughter? Drop your answer in the comments. Someone out there might be searching for the kind of richness only you can describe. Not every story ends with fireworks. Some end with quiet mornings, small voices calling you home, and the slow rebuilding of trust that was once broken beyond recognition. This wasn't a tale of perfect people. It was the story of a woman who loved deeply, lost quietly, and rebuilt with both hands, not for revenge, but for peace. And a man who had to lose everything he thought mattered, to find what always had. Motherhood isn't about biology. It's about presence. It's about being the one who stays when everything else leaves. The one who holds the line between chaos and calm. Redemption doesn't shout. It whispers. It shows up with scraped knuckles, uneven pancakes, and learning how to braid hair without getting it tangled. And humility. That's when a man known for owning everything learns that love can't be owned. It can only be earned. If this story teaches us anything, it's this. Healing isn't loud. Growth isn't instant. And sometimes, the strongest kind of love is the kind that quietly survives when it had every reason to give up. Whether you're a mother, a father, a child, or simply someone trying to start over, remember this. You are not broken for needing time. You are not weak for letting go of what once defined you. And you are never too far gone to come back home. Never measure love by what it gives you. Measure it by what it survives.